Okay, good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's coffee talk. Couple of reminders before we get started. One, we will make a copy of today's slides as well as a link to the recording available. It will likely come to you on Tuesday, given that Monday is a holiday. And I don't know that we'll be able to get it out today, so likely on Tuesday, but we will make that all available to you. My name is Sean O'Brien, the president of QuickRate. As always, pleased to be joined by Steve Huntington. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So my name is Steve Huntington. I've been working with Sean for a little over a decade now as a director of analytics. I've spent my entire career working with community financial institutions for everything from strategic planning and valuation to advisory and capital planning. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Just again, couple of reminders. Use the Q&A and chat box. You already had a chat in. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate the kind words. We are going to start a little bit differently this month. I think since we're kind of in the throes of the transition, I thought it might be helpful to just do some polling questions and kind of get a sense of where everyone is. I think we have an idea where everyone is, but thought they might be an interesting way to start. So I'm going to launch the first question, which is, have you completed your day one analysis? So just a simple yes or no. And we'll probably give this about 30 to 45 seconds to
So
run.
everyone should see a separate little pop-up window that just showed up. If it's not on your primary screen, it might be hiding somewhere else on a secondary monitor. So look around for it.
Particularly if you're using two monitors, it'll probably show up on the second one. So like I said, we'll just give this a few more seconds. We have quite a few on the call today, so thank you all very much for joining us today. Okay.
Right. We had a question related to it.
Got
Sean,
it.
that just popped up. Day one analysis, meaning have you done that initial adjustment to your ALLL reserve to make it a CECL appropriate methodology, the day one balance sheet adjustment?
Yeah, it's really a comparison between your 1231 ALLL and then effectively a January 1st same look using the CECL guidance. Okay, so about 2/3 of you have, 1/3 of you have not. So I'm going to just show those results, and then I'm going to move on to the next question. Back to here. So for those of you who have made and those who still will make it, do you anticipate your comparison to be higher, lower, or roughly the same as your current ALLL? So we'll go ahead and give this about 30 to 45 seconds to
Sean, any thoughts on that 2/3, 1/3 for the first question, as far as the who has made the day one adjustment and who has not? And we're seeing those adjustments come in throughout the first quarter, right? Some people were making them in January. Some people are making them now in February. We'll continue seeing them making them throughout March. And the idea is that it's done sometime during the first quarter, and it's backdated to be effective as of January 1st.
That's right. That's right. So don't worry if you haven't done it yet. There are plenty who are still working on it.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is day one comparison. About 56% of you anticipate it to be, or have it being higher, 13% lower, and a 31% about the same. So that is all good information. We'll share that. And let me move on to the next question we have regarding Q factors. Whoops. Let me make sure I got to stop sharing that to move to the next question. All right. So the next question, as part of your day one analysis, did your Q factors change? So again, just a simple yes or no. And we'll give this 30 to 45 seconds to go. All right, so, I got a little bit more time here. Let me give that a little more time. Okay, here, about 54% of you said no. And or 55%, about 45% yes. So kind of what we would have anticipated and kind of have seen anecdotally. So again, not a huge surprise, but very, very interesting nonetheless. All right, so let me move on to the next question. So at this point in the first quarter, what do you see as your biggest challenge remaining to implement or transition to CECL? And again, we'll give this 30 to 45 seconds so everybody can answer it. And welcome, Meredith. No problems on the question. Welcome to Coffee Talks. Just let us know how we can help. All right. All right, let's see. We'll give this a few more seconds. All right. So leading the way is external acceptance from a regulator or an auditor, additional provision necessary, accuracy of WARM calculations about 38%, additional provision about 16%, external acceptance about 46%, and then none 17%. So again, I'll stop that and share the results. And again, part of the reason the link is going to take a little bit longer is we want to include all the poll data in as well. So it just takes us a little bit longer to get everything wrapped up. But again, we'll include all this in the email on Tuesday. Okay, so let me stop that one, go to the next question. Held to maturity securities. Again, this is probably for most of you an NA, but nevertheless, as a result of CECL, do any of you need to make a provision for your held to maturity securities portfolios? I suspect this will be a small number, but we thought we'd ask it just in case and make sure we're not overlooking anything that you might be dealing with. Okay. All right. We'll just give this another second, but for the most part, not surprisingly, 97% of you said no. 3% of you said yes. And again, I think that's probably what we would see as typical. All right. And then the final question is loan level granularity. Let me make sure I can operate the polling questions. Do you think you would benefit now or in the future from more loan level granularity in your analysis? So as you're answering that question, this is a little bit of a leading question. I think, our anticipation as the year goes on is this whole CECL process will evolve. And I think we want to make sure we're, being sensitive to your needs and wants, as well as continuing to enhance the tool. So I would anticipate as the year goes on, as we try to add levels of functionality, we are certainly welcoming input from you, our users. And I think this is an area that has come up in some instances already. So we're trying to get a sense of how much or how welcome this might be. So we'll just give this another few seconds. And I'm going ahead and end this one. And so about 29% of you said yes, 10% said no, and 61% not sure, which is perfectly reasonable. But again, thank you all very much for participating in the polls today. We will again include the results. I believe it's part of our email next week. We should get that captured in the recording. But thank you all very, very much for it. So today, I think what we want to do is to continue to talk a little bit about the updates and the enhancements we've currently made and will be making here in the next few months. And then obviously address any questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Steve here to just talk a little bit about some of the enhancements we've made that are repeats. And then secondly, future enhancements. Steve, take it away.
Yeah, hold on, let me get my screen. So the way I typically organize this slide is sort of a running list of some of the more recent and some of the upcoming enhancements. The ones that have been out there for the longest that you're probably mostly all familiar with will be up top, and then the newest ones are right down there on the bottom. So as most of you know, we put out another more sort of enhanced version of our Excel-based warm estimator tool, where we wanted to take into account some amortization options. And again, that's evolved as the guidance and information that we get from the regulators, the NCUA, and the accountants has come in. It was last October, I believe, or so. It wasn't until October, November, the NCUA had finished a study that they were doing, and they decided that they wanted to help provide some more data to credit unions. So they contracted out a bunch of data work and got some default warm guidance, and also some default prepayment speed guidance as well. And when they shared with us the methodology that they used in doing those warm calculations, and that was the first time that they sort of had kind of suggested that they took a more aggressive approach to the warm calculations than they had in the past. And that more was taking into account amortization. So bringing those warms down to typically a lower value once you're taking not only prepayments, but also amortizations into account. So we thought at that point it was time to add in some additional options in the warm estimator tool, where you could get those warms down to a lower level if you so desired, by putting into some detailed amortization assumptions. We'll go through that in detail in a few minutes. So if you have questions about that, you might hang on to them for just a couple minutes. We also added an export function where you can just decide to export your entire historical data set. That was just, we were getting a lot of requests from users that they could get all of the entire quarterly data information that they could use if they wanted to do any additional spot checking or auditing of the lifetime historical loss rates for a particular segment here or there, just to triple check the math. And so we added that as a separate Excel export, where you can get every quarter of all pieces of data going all the way back to the dinosaurs if you needed it. Data file upload. This is about a month and a half old or so, or it's been up there for that amount of time. This was just a new tab on the tool that we designed and put out there as an administrative, just an organizational tool. If you have any other documents that you'd like to have, organized or housed in the same spot as your CECL analysis, whether it's an updated policy document, whether it's your warm calculation for that quarter, and you want to attach that to each of your scenarios where you used it, so that you can refer to it now in the future with your auditors and examiners, or whatever it is. You now have the ability to securely upload and store files in the tool in general, and in any specific scenario you'd like within the tool. ACL policy templates. So you notice every one of these things has been based upon feedback that we've gotten directly from you guys in these coffee talks and in other ways we've reached out. So we really have been helpful, all the good ideas that you guys have sent our way. We took some time, worked with some auditing firms, and came up with a couple different sample policy documents. They're Word documents that are going to be live. They were supposed to be live this morning, but they will come over the weekend. If they're not live today, they will be over the weekend. They'll just be in the CECLSolver resources button on your main page. There's blue buttons along the top. There's one called CECLSolver resources, and it will have 2 Word document options. They're just templates to help you rewriting that ALLL policy to make it more of an ACL policy. And you'll notice they are not 100-page long documents. We boiled it down to some of the most important elements, and you can build from there. Current loan balances for scenarios can now be automatically updated for a historical financial period. So again, based upon a lot of comments from users that, when you pull up your old scenario from last quarter and you're updating it for this quarter, all that historical data is updated automatically by our system, right? We're pulling in the new loss data every quarter for you and your peer group and everything else. But what the tool wasn't doing is automatically updating loan balances, or having a button where you could automatically update loan balances to a newer financial period if you wanted to. Something that you would do if you had an old scenario that you were updating for this quarter. So now there's a date box on the top of your current balance column where you can click on that, and then you'll see every different quarter end going back in time. So you can pick any financial quarter that you want, and all the current loan balances will update for that quarter. You can still certainly override the current balances with a more recent, a non-quarter end balance. If you're doing your calculation as of February 1st, for example, and you want to plug in your current GL balances as of February 1st, you can still type in February 1 on the date in the date box, just manually, and then manually update your balances to be as of that date. But if you're doing it as of quarter end, you don't have to manually type them in anymore. They'll be there for you to automatically update. Next, and these are the new things. Oh, yeah.
Hey, I just got a question in, Stephen. And one, I wanted to thank Kevin O'Connor for his help with policies as well. He shared a sample, and we incorporated much of that in there into one of those templates. So Kevin, thank you very much. Question came in. We knew from running parallel comparisons in 22 that we would be significantly overfunded. We wrote into our allowance policy that if we were overfunded, then the executive team would decide whether an adjustment was necessary. We are overfunded by 1.4 million and don't want to take that significant adjustment to the financials. Is that acceptable? So, you know, I think in theory, right, you would take it out. In practice, I would say, you know, I think I'd probably try to find ways to defend more of it. Secondly, I don't think most auditors are gonna, you know, they're not gonna be, or regulators are going to be disappointed you have too much in there. I think this is probably something we might want to talk just directly on, since it's you know, a little bit unique. So, but I would tell you, no, I don't think you have to, but you know, we can talk about ways maybe how to present it that you know, might be helpful. So
there are certainly institutions we see that are significantly overfunded, and you know, overfunded based upon your own historical experience, and even overfunded based upon, you know, peer experience, just straight up overfunded by any methodology, right? And so then it's very subjective how to handle that. Do we want to take the, don't call it the hit, do we want to take the bonus now and then have a lower reserve, or do we want to find ways to be more conservative about our assumptions to get the analysis to get closer to where we think we want to keep it, or split the difference in some ways? I think it's a combination of looking closely at your historical assumptions and your Q factor adjustments, and the WARM calculations with methodology you use for WARMs. If you're trying to show a higher reserve, you don't want to use amortization adjustments in your WARMs, right? Because that's going to bring your WARMs down. You want to be conservative about your WARM assumptions. So I would use a prepayment only adjusted WARM, which is still acceptable and appropriate. That'll lead you to a higher WARM. All things being considered, unless you've been recovering money every year going back in time, that will lead to at least a somewhat higher historical analysis, if not for your credit union, at least for the peer group, which will give you another justification or narrative around keeping it higher. So there's lots of ways we can talk about being more conservative about assumptions to have the analysis show closer to where you think intuitively you want to keep it. But that's very specific to your numbers. So we'd be happy to look at that with you.
Yeah, and just to follow up, and again, thanks to Kevin, but also Brian commented, we were quote unquote forced to reduce our balance when we were unable to justify the balance we had accumulated. Work to ensure your assumptions fully encapsulate your potential losses. And right, and that's why it is a little bit of a unique thing. It's interesting, Brian, and thanks for sharing that they did, you know, have you pull out you know, money of the reserves. But I think that's where it really does get into your specific situation and how best to you know, kind of support and defend those additional monies. But thank you for sharing that.
And this is where,
you know, unfortunately, it is always a little bit of subjectivity with the regular auditor who comes in, and but you know, I think it does speak to the point of, you know, defending and you know, building support for your Q factors, et cetera, as best we can. Steve, anything you want to add there before you?
Yeah, no, I was, these are the things that none of us really as an industry could anticipate what kind of, what was going to be happening this year. You know, we probably have 50% of questions around that, 50% of people would say, I don't think they will allow us to decrease our reserve. And then other people are telling us they absolutely forced us to decrease our reserve. So
Yeah.
that's where I think this forum here can be a really helpful place for you guys to share that kind of information, and we can keep tabs on how people are really experiencing it in the auditing and examining community on a month-by-month basis as we go through this year. So we'll probably have a poll question on that maybe next month, where we not just did it go up or down, but did you receive pushback, significant pushback about your initial analysis as to whether it was higher or lower than they anticipated. Yeah.
Steve, I think I interrupted you. You were starting to talk about this new page.
Yeah, so these new updates, update A on this page is already live. You can already, again, on that circle date column, date box up there. If you click on that date box, you'll see a drop down and you'll see 9/30/2022 and 6/30/2022. And if you click on one of those dates, all of your current loan balances will auto update to be as of a date you chose. Now, if you want that to be February 1st of this year, you can still type in 02/01/23 in that date box. Obviously, the loan balances will not auto update because we don't have a call report, data for that date. So it still works as it did, but now you can actually auto populate call report data there instead of manually typing it in. Updates B and C are not live yet, but they will be, I'm pretty sure, on Monday, next week. If not, worst case scenario, it'll be the following Monday. Update B, again, came directly from users where they said, we have some adjustments we're making to our balances each quarter, right? We have a small portion of SBA guaranteed loans where there's a guaranteed portion that we want to back out from our current balance. Some people have fully share secured loans that they're trying to back out of their unsecured of their consumer loans. And it used to be that you would just have to manually subtract that number from your current balance and then make a note on the right saying, hey, we netted out $2 million here. Now you'll have a brand new column where you can explicitly make all those adjustments to your stated balance. So it's just clear to follow from A to B to C. So hopefully that'll help. And then finally, on the bottom right there on the summary of the CECL page, for the last couple of years, the primary goal of everybody here has been to get our arms around what the total overall impact of CECL is going to be, right, on our balance sheet and on our reserve. And so the way we had organized the summary page, we showed your necessary reserve under CECL, your existing reserve, any unfunded commitment, surplus or shortfall, and any HTM securities adjustment you're making. And we added it all up to give you kind of a total surplus or shortfall from a CECL perspective. Now that we know exactly the accounting entries that are happening, we wanted to be more specific to the spots on the balance sheet that you're actually going to be putting these values in, right? On your balance sheet, you don't have a total CECL impact line item. You have a loan portfolio line item, you have a securities portfolio line item, and you have an unfunded commitments portfolio, you want to call it that, line item. 3 separate line items on the call report. So now there'll be 3 separate things here on the tool just to avoid confusion. The math is the same, but now you'll see on the summary, it's an ACL, total calculated ACL for loans. That's what you're having on the balance sheet on your call report. If you click on the securities tab, you'll have the separate surplus or shortfall on the securities tab. And the unfunded commitments tab has always had a surplus shortfall calculation, but we transferred that number and just copied it down here on the summary page. And we're taking that off of the summary page just because we don't want people to do apples and oranges. We want everyone clear as to what the actual accounting entries are going forward. So we think that will just help for clarity. John?
Yeah, great, Steve. And I think these are going to get released this weekend, Steve, so they're not out there yet, correct?
Yeah, I believe this should be working for next week as well. You'll have that same. So when you're updating a scenario,
I think Mary was checking it and hers weren't updating. So I think it's going to be released over the weekend.
Hopefully that'll be working properly on Monday, but it's part of this new stuff we're rolling out. And the idea is, we're transitioning from doing this parallel stuff to having a CECL calculation, right? Living in a CECL world and simply updating that, right? Within the same methodology going forward, as we will hopefully probably forever. So when you grab your old scenario and you're updating it for the next quarter, all the historical stuff can be rolled easily. The things that you had to manually type in were updated unfunded commitments balances, updated old reserve level, and updated loan balances. Now we have drop-down boxes that will allow them to auto update if you want to. So this is the same concept as the loan portfolio on the summary page.
Right, and then we had a question incoming on, are you only required to update CECL quarterly? And so again,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say I would not, there's nothing in the CECL standard at all that discusses frequency of reserve calculation, necessary frequency of reserve calculations any differently than it's ever been in the past. However frequently you have been doing reserve calculations that your examiners and auditors have been comfortable with in the past, I would make no change to that. John?
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think I think quarterly is certainly what I would suggest, because as I think most credit unions have been doing that. You certainly have some who do it monthly, but I don't know that you'd want it to be much less frequent than that.
There are people that do it monthly, and it is easier. I mean, not if you do. There are people that use our tool and update it every single month and save a new scenario monthly. The benefit to that, if I was thinking of benefits, is that on each non-quarter end month, there's very little work you have to do. You're updating your balances. You're double checking your Q factors to see that nothing has massively changed in the last 30 days, right? So you're making very small incremental changes on the non-quarter end month. And then at the end of the next quarter, you'll have more loss data from the call reports, you'll have more peer data, and it's a little bit more reanalysis of Q factors and look backs and all that. But we haven't seen any regulatory or accounting push that suggests if you'd been doing it quarterly in the past, you now have to start doing it monthly. We've seen none of that.
No, yeah. This next slide is just a reminder that we do have an upload document tab. So if you do want to include any documents of your own, the warm calculations, anything else, you can upload those right to your institution or a specific scenario. Steve, anything you want to add here?
Nope. Again, this is not. If you're currently working with us and we're doing your warm calculations, you're not going to start uploading your loan level data that you're sending to us through this. That's not what this is for. This is just a tool for you, the end user, to attach any files that you think are relevant to CECL, whether it is the warms that we calculated for you and you want to attach them here, whether it's some additional narrative you've done in Excel or Word where you describe qualitative factor adjustments or economic data or anything that you want, a list of individually assessed loans that you guys have worked off in the past, whatever that you think for your own purposes you'd like to organize and just keep in a folder here. That's all.
So the next question that came in is, have you seen any issue with regulators comparing your ALLL to loans percentage to your peers' ALLL loans to percentage? Yes, I mean, that's actually was one of the reasons why we wanted to show that number, because we do know oftentimes that regulators do look at that, and the follow-up of that is that David's, excuse me, I'm battling a cold this morning, is higher than their peers. But I think one of the things that we do know is that regulators do look at peer numbers, and so if you do nothing with it, we simply wanted you to be aware of what those numbers were. Again, it doesn't impact the calculation per se, but I think either way, whether you're higher or lower than peer, it's worth noting. I've always taken a position as a director in a community financial institution with our reserve, is that I always want to be at or above our peer, because I feel like if our loss experience is better than the peer, and our reserve is higher than the peer, it's very difficult for them to push back and say we are not adequately reserved. It's not foolproof, but it's an approach that we've taken, and I feel strongly about, because it does force them to then justify why the reserve is not adequate. And so I was a big proponent of showing that number, because again, we have certainly encountered in my many years dealing with the reserve at our institution, instances where our examiners have repeatedly talked about where the peer data was. And so we just felt like it was helpful for those of you who've been fortunate enough not to have any loss experience. It's a great supplemental piece of information that, again, we know regulators are considering and looking at. And so if it can be helpful or thoughtful on maybe making an additional adjustment or a Q factor based on that, again, we felt like it was additive. You can ultimately ignore the data if you want, but our feeling is we're going to try to provide you with as much information to better, kind of deal with all this as we can. Steve, I know he's just took a long podium talk there, but go ahead.
No, it's all right. I'll borrow a soapbox for a second now and hop on there. The peer, the peer data, as Sean said, can be taken into account as much or as little or not at all as you find it appropriate and helpful. If you have a segment that you just haven't had losses in forever but you're not getting away with having 0 on your CECL, on your calculation for it, and you're trying to come up with some justification, but nothing economically pops off in your head and nothing about your historical experience, you look at the peer data. And if the peer data shows a moderate loss there, then that's a perfect narrative and justification for you bumping up a Q factor there. But the peer data is not always perfect. If you have a smallish peer group and a couple of them had really high losses on one segment that not a lot of the credit unions have loans in, you can have some peer data that's kind of wacky, especially if you're looking at state or regional level peer data. So if the peer data shows something that's kind of out of whack with what you have, just ignore it in that particular instance, right? You don't have to take it into account. You don't have to justify every single comparison of every peer number to yours. You use it. This is where you can cherry pick, in my opinion, when it comes to peer data, what you think is reasonable, comparable, and helpful. I would suggest looking more at the total peer average loss rate as opposed to doing too much analysis on the segment level, especially again with certain types of loans, right? There's a lot of credit unions that do not have payday alternative loans or student loans. So if you have a peer group of just your $50 to $100 million credit unions and you're using the state or the regional level, and then you're looking at student loan loss rates from 3 years ago, and it's a simple average, the peer numbers could be kind of wacky. It happens sometimes. If that's the case, ignore it, move on, use your own data as your guide. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, so again, just to follow up to that from David, I'm looking at it from a total peer average versus ours. Are they marking you up for being higher by a certain percentage? I mean, again, I think they're going to be, I would argue they see it as more favorable because again, it's the higher reserve. I mean, ultimately these, the regulators are managers of an insurance fund, right? And so they, more reserves in there for their fund, is better. So, again, every regulator is going to approach it potentially differently, but I'm always going to lean on the side of having an adequate and substantial reserve. So it's a lot of it's just culture, a lot of it's preference, but I don't think it's ever going to hurt you. Steve, anything you want to add there before we move on?
Nope.
Okay, so let me get rid of that one. Let me just check the chat box here. Tiffany, thank you very much. Glad to see you like the file upload. So great. All right, so next slide, Steve, I'll keep moving. This is a little bit of a recap or a refresh just on the enhancements you've made to our amortization and WARM estimator. Yeah.
So this is something we've gone over a few times in the past over the last couple months, but it is a big enhancement, and it's probably the largest assumption that has a significant impact on CECL is what the remaining maturities of your segments are. Again, because that goes to the heart of CECL, estimating losses over the remaining lives. That over the remaining lives is the biggest change from everything we've always been doing in the past. So defining how do we calculate remaining lives is obviously going to be critical. And the guidance, we knew it was going to be refined. We knew it would be updated and changed over time. And of course it was. I think, well, luckily it went in this direction. The NCUA pretty much agreed that more aggressive approaches towards WARM calculations to get them down to a relatively lower level. So people aren't seeing 12-year WARMs on their mortgage portfolios. They're seeing 4, 5, 6-year WARMs on even a portfolio of nothing but 30-year fixed mortgages. Once you take into account not only prepayments, but also amortization schedules. And so we thought, after getting that guidance, talking with the NCUA about their methodology and how they went about doing it, that we should provide additional options for the warm calculations that were more, I don't want to say more aggressive, because that suggests that they might not be appropriate, just less conservative. It's a and so if your reserve is a lot higher than you anticipated it being, you're looking at a large shortfall, you think it seems unreasonably large, you're looking for a way to get that down, instead of trying to eke out a bunch of negative Q factor adjustments and justify all of them, which can be exhausting to keep doing over and over again. You might consider looking at a more amortization adjusted warm calculation, which again is completely backed by the NCUA's own methodologies now. So we feel comfortable saying that, where we didn't until 3 months ago. That's why we came up with this alternative. Sean?
Yeah, and I think it's important to always have context, right? And when we first designed the tool, our bias was to be as conservative as possible, right? The intent of FASB and CECL was to create a more conservative reserve approach by encompassing longer look-back periods and aggregating net charge-off activity. So that was our bias when we designed this. And the simple axiom is this, right? The longer the warm period, the more conservative approach. So that's where we started. As Steve said, and what we continue to strive to do is monitor the evolution of what's going to happen from theory to practice. As Steve mentioned, not only did we have credit unions who felt like 10, 11, 12-year warms were inconsistent with what they knew the activity of their portfolio was, we also had the NCUA come in and talk about what they saw maybe as relevant as well. So we're going to continue to do that. When we think it's additive, we're going to provide it. There's no one right way or wrong way to approach this. A lot of it is based on the culture of your credit union and your approach to reserve analysis. But we feel, again, we're going to try to provide you with as much information as we can about what's happening, and then it's your decision to determine what's appropriate for your credit union, and we'll assist you along the way. But my bias is always going to be more conservative, because that's the safest approach. And as a tool provider, that's what we felt like was appropriate. Okay, next page. This is just, again, in greater detail. Steve, anything you want to discuss here on the different amortizations?
This is where the magic happens. Now, this is where I spend my time.
This is your wheelhouse.
It is. I close my eyes at night and I still see this. I'm hopefully the only one on the call that happens to. That's my burden to bear. Hopefully it's not yours. On the top left is what we've always done, right? The warm calculator, where we're taking balance, maturity date information, doing a basic unadjusted warm calculation, then adjusting it to reflect estimated annual prepayments. Now we decided, let's take into account amortization. Well, we're going to have to do the warm calculation a little differently once we take into account amortization. And the way we do that is we can, on the bottom left, there's a global assumption. So two choices you have if you want to do amortization impact. One is make a global assumption that all the loans in this bucket do amortize and do so on a straight line basis. And there are no balloon payments or anything else, right? Everyone amortizes from where they are today to zero smoothly over the course of the remaining loan. When you do that math, you end up with a calculation that provides all the pay downs of that individual loan, right, on an annual basis. So we can start with the current balance, a snapshot of your segment of all the loans in that segment. Let's say there's 700,000 worth. And when we track those individual loans all the way until the balance is zero. And we can do that because we now have amortization calculation each year and prepayment calculation each year. You add those up, those are your total pay downs on each loan. You do it at the portfolio level, you track that down to a zero balance, and you can calculate a weighted average remaining maturity that takes into account all assumed pay downs. On the top right, same concept, but we're allowing loan level granularity if you really want to get into the nitty gritty. This allows you to go in for each individual loan and say, does this loan amortize or is it interest only? Is there a balloon payment and how much is that balloon payment? And then the amortization, the annual amortization schedule for that loan is shown across the right there, and it all updates automatically. So for those of you who want a nice big, large amortization schedule for your entire portfolio, so you can see when all these loans are falling off based upon standard amortization or based upon prepayments, then you can certainly do it this way. Or if you just say, hey, I just want to get the WARM lower, I'm just going to use the portfolio based approach. Either one of them is appropriate. They are both again defensible because of the newer guidance from the NCUA. If you like the conservative approach that we've always had on the top left there, and you're not looking for ways to get that reserve down, then there is no problem with doing it exactly as you have been doing it for the past however long and ignoring additional amortization assumptions.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think that goes, that's at the heart of this, right? There's no better method, right? There's the appropriate method for your institution. Again, my bias is always to be more conservative. I prefer the longer one, but I also understand if that's not your approach. And so, again, we're just going to try to provide you with information to help best, align your situation. So fantastic, Steve. I will say I never think about this stuff at night. These amortizations are not in my mind.
I gotta figure out something to do with my free time.
Next up are the historical data sets. So again, one of the things and questions that we have gotten multiple times is how in fact do we calculate the net charge-off activity and ratios. So what Steve has put together here is a simple example of a 3-year WARM using just static data, where he kind of lays out how we do it, and then you can use the same methodology if you actually want to reconstruct your own with the detailed export. So Steve, jump in here and take this one away.
Yeah, so we have 2 different tools to help you go through all of your detailed historical stuff if you're trying to, validate and audit some specific calculations all the way from cradle to grave using all the quarterly data. The first piece is what I mentioned before, the newer export function, where you can simply export not just the results of your tool with the annual summary columns, but an entire every single quarterly piece of information from your credit union that goes into the calculations. You can export that as an Excel file, and then you can use this. This is a template. This has sample data in it, but you can certainly cut and paste your quarterly data from that export into this sample template and perfectly recreate the lifetime loss rate. But it is, to summarize, simply, we calculate each of your quarterly net charge-off ratios, right, going back in time, and we add up. It is an aggregate of all those net charge-off ratios over time. We're trying to calculate a multi-year net charge-off ratio, right? Your lifetime historical loss rate is not an annual or annualized number. It's an aggregate ratio over multiple periods and years. That's not something we typically do in the industry. Typically, everything is annualized from a ratio standpoint. It is not on CECL because we are trying to look at a multi-year period. And so the math is a little different than we're all used to from calculating things like ROA and regular net charge-off ratios. So we try to help people understand that conceptual difference in calculating an aggregate lifetime loss rate as opposed to annual incremental loss rate. If anyone has any questions and wants to look further into the math and can't get there from these tools, then shoot us a message and reach out and we'll see what we can do to help.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. So again, just a refresh on some topics that for some of you still may be working through just the day one, quote unquote, comparisons. I know there were some of us still working on this, no problem. But that comparison 12/31 is still under the ALLL, and then effectively we're doing a January 1st comparison utilizing the new CECL methodology, and then making that adjustment if appropriate. Also, and again, Kevin O'Connor, thanks again for your contributions to helping with the policies. We had a lot of comments on whether you needed a new policy. We did have a number of requests from credit unions about policies. It's typically not an area we would delve into, but because of the inquiries we had about a policy, we did take an attempt at putting some templates together. Kevin was instrumental in developing one of those that he's using at his credit union, and was generous enough to share it with the group. We also sought advice from some of our auditor friends who about what it is. And so the templates are really, again, there for you to, move from just a blank white page and make them your own. Again, again, my bias is to be a little bit less wordy and let your regulators or auditors fill in the blanks. Sometimes that's an easy give, is to let them, enhance your policy. But we did, feel like there were a few policy components to consider. And again, Paul Allen from Saltmarsh was, again, kind enough to share his thoughts on that in a December coffee talk. And we do hope to have Paul on again in March. But these were just some things to consider. Steve, anything you want to add about those two topics before I move on and we take a couple of questions?
No, I guess I would just point out that, it's just Sean mentioned, we typically wouldn't get too much into the policies, but because of how many people asked, we went ahead and did it. So I guess the moral of the story is there, bugging Sean works. If it,
That's right.
Yeah. And for the other, comment about, people named Cecil, I've run into that in my own life. I say Cecil so often, my 10-year-old and 13-year-old sons think I have this imaginary friend that they've never seen named Cecil, and I have a hate-love relationship with him. So yes, I certainly feel you there.
Steve, I don't know if you've seen Frank's question here about when we pull
Yeah.
up.
So Frank, that's something we probably want to call up and talk to you about one-on-one. There's the usual confusion there is because of the change in all the segments, right? Last year, as we all know, the NCUA went ahead and changed all their segmentation for reporting asset quality stuff. Just made a mess of the call reports when it comes to charge-offs and recoveries and all that stuff by segment at a time that was poor timing, but water over the dam, I guess. And so if you're looking at the detailed historical data, you will see older segments that don't exist anymore, kind of in some of the legacy subsections, and you will see the newer segments that didn't exist until last year in the updated one. So I think it's more of I'd want to see exactly where you're looking, and then I think we could help you explain what's going on there.
And Sonia, your question about the templates, they should be under the blue button for CECLSolver resources. I'm not sure if they're there yet today, but they will be this after the weekend.
Yeah, it'll be 2 Word documents that are at the bottom of the CECLSolver resources button. They were supposed to go live this morning, but sometimes we need to clear caches and all that stuff on the server to make it happen.
Exactly. So those will get updated over the weekend. So they'll be out there to come next week. All right, let me see if I've gotten all the questions and chats here before we move to the next slide. Great. Thank you. You're very welcome. Thanks for the question. All right, so let's move on. Steve, anything else you want to add here on the WARM and prepayment guidance that the NCUA
No,
provided?
Yeah, I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but this was a big deal for the NCUA to provide this, and they're gonna continue maintaining it. They're gonna update these prepayment speed calculations that are based upon loan level industry data on a quarterly basis. So our WARM estimator tool will be updated each quarter to reflect the updated calculations from the NCUA. Expect them to stay relatively stable until we have changes in interest rates are going to obviously have the biggest impact on prepayment speeds. And keep in mind that that's an inverse relationship between the prepayment speeds and the WARM. So if interest rates were to somehow start dropping again, then prepayment speeds would be increasing and WARMs would be decreasing, and vice versa.
Fantastic. Okay. Again, this is something that's, for you to think about, not to be answered today. If you have something immediately, you can, but I think, again, our idea is that we know there's going to be an evolution to CECL. We anticipate as you get more comfortable with the methodology, again, there may be areas where you might want more help or thoughts. And so we just want you to be thinking about it. I mean, we're certainly thinking about it with our IntelliCredit division. Steve's thinking about it, we're thinking about it, just trying to, again, continue to enhance the tool. But one thing we do every, now and then get is a request for a little bit more consultation than we currently have done. So just be thoughtful about that and share any ideas as we move forward. So a question came in I enter the loan balances every month, and other than updating first mortgages with a length of 7 years, that is all I do. Should I be doing anything else? Should I be entering all of our first mortgages for amortization?
Two parts
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah.
The first part, should you be doing anything else if you're updating your analysis on a quarterly basis and then saving it as a new analysis each time, right? Don't override your old ones, because then you won't have that historical timeline of calculations. But you're saving it as a new one each month. There's not as much work that has to be done, because you're only considering what's changed in the last 30 days, in my credit union or in the environment around me, that pertains to expected losses. So updating balances and just double checking your Q factors, looking at the assumptions or adjustments that you've made and said, has anything changed in my shop or in the environment around me, which suggests that things are somehow different. And then a little bit more work after each quarter, when we get some more peer data and you get more loss experience from the call report. If you have a big jump in losses in the next quarter, you do have more work to do, because your historical loss experience will now reflect that big, jump you had there. And it's up to you to decide, do I expect that to continue? Right? Do I leave that big loss we just had, which is now part of my historical experience, in there? Or do I make a negative Q factor adjustment because it was a non-recurring one-time situation with a weird, situation that we don't expect reflects what we're going to see moving forward, right? So when things change, there's more work to be done, more assumptions to be reevaluated. In a straight, flat environment, not a lot to be done. Second part of the question, should you be plugging in all of your first mortgage loans individually and looking at amortization assumptions about them for that segment of your portfolio? I'd answer it with a question. How do you feel about your WARM in that segment? How do you feel about where you're currently reserved for your mortgage portfolio? Are you getting pushback that you don't think that somebody doesn't think there's enough there? Or do you think you're over reserved? That will drive whether you want to be more or less conservative or aggressive with your WARM calculation. And you can affect your WARM calculation by deciding to take into account amortization, bring the WARM down, bring the reserve down, or the opposite. Hope that helps.
Excuse me. Yes. And so perfect. And then the question came in about the slides. Again, just a reminder, we will send out a copy of the slides and a link to the recording or the presentation today. It will likely come over the weekend or Monday or Tuesday, with the holiday on Monday. I don't know that we'll get it out today, but we will have it to you by the time you're back in the office on Tuesday. Okay, so we're pushing up on an hour. Any final questions as I put up? We will be back in March with a coffee talk. My hope is Paul Allen from Saltmarsh will join us again. Paul's been a tremendous friend and guest for our coffee talks. So we're working on the date to make sure he can do it. We do have a demo if you're looking for more instruction just on the tool itself on the 22nd. Thank you all for the kind words on the chats today. And Steve, any final words for everyone before we let them have the rest of their day to them?
Nope. I mean, I just want to thank everyone for not only showing up today, but for being interactive. The more of these questions that we get from you guys, the less work John and I have to do to prepare, which is always great. But also it drives, as you can see from all the updates and enhancements, that list of things that we have done to enhance the tool has been driven 90% by you guys and 10% by additional information that you're squeezing out of the NCUA, right? So this forum not only provides us with a roadmap for how to improve this tool, but also allows you guys to get a feel for how other people are handling it or dealing with it, or what we're seeing in practice now that we're getting audits done, now that we're getting examiners to give us opinions. And so we really do appreciate it.
Yeah, and likewise, and I thank you all for attending today. Thank you all very much for the kind words about the coffee talk. We really take a lot of pride and are heartwarmed by the fact that all of you appreciate it. You show up every month. So thank you again. Thanks to everybody for contributing. Have a great weekend, and then we'll be back in March. And certainly if you have any questions in the interim, reach out to David or Jason. they'll, incorporate Steve or I as necessary. But, hope everybody has a great long weekend, and we will see you next month.
Thanks.
Bye now.